If you ask most Americans why buying a home feels impossible today, they'll tell you some version of the same story. We tried, we saved, we did everything right, and then the housing market basically flipped us the bird. And honestly, that's not far from the truth. Because somewhere between the 1980s and now, America managed to turn the simple act of buying a home into a competition so brutal it makes NFL playoffs look like a church picnic. Today, the average home costs more than 7 times what the average family makes in a year. 7 times. That's not a market, that's a brick wall. And in cities like San Francisco, New York, Austin, Seattle, forget it. Even people with good jobs, stable careers, and plans that don't involve financial chaos are looking at the numbers and thinking, okay, so what am I actually supposed to do with this? Sell a kidney? Start mining crypto in my bathtub? But the real plot twist is this. America didn't just run out of houses. What happened was far slower, quieter, and honestly, much stranger. Wages froze, construction costs exploded, mortgage rates jumped off a cliff, and then Wall Street walked in like a hungry raccoon at a backyard barbecue and started scooping up every house it could find. The entire system drifted away from ordinary people so gradually that by the time most Americans looked up, home ownership had transformed into something else entirely, something colder, more strategic, more corporate. So if you've ever wondered why home ownership feels like a dream from a different century, or why every listing you like somehow gets bought by a company with a name like Everstone Capital Residential Partners, the answer lies in the long, messy, infuriating story of how America quietly priced out its own people. And to understand how we got here, you have to start with the simplest, harshest truth of them all.
Here's the thing nobody wants to admit. For decades, the math has been broken. And not slightly off broken. I mean, your GPS thinks you're in the Atlantic Ocean broken. Somewhere along the way, wages and home prices stopped living in the same universe. Wages crawled forward inch by inch like a soldier low crawling under barbed wire. Meanwhile, home prices took off like a fighter jet. The gap didn't just grow, it detonated. Your parents could buy a house on one income. Today, 2 incomes barely get you into the parking lot of the conversation. Back then, saving for a down payment was a challenge. Now it's an extreme sport. People aren't building a future, they're just trying to survive the monthly cost of existing. And in the middle of all that pressure, the price of building homes skyrocketed too. Lumber prices went wild, concrete went up, steel went up. Labor costs climbed, and the number of construction workers dropped so fast it looked like someone turned off a switch. Suddenly, building a home wasn't just expensive, it was like organizing a military operation with half the soldiers missing. Then came the mortgage plot twist. In 2020, mortgage rates were low enough to make even skeptical renters say, okay, maybe we'll give this a shot. It felt like the one moment in modern history where the housing market actually threw people a bone. But then, inflation surged, interest rates spiked, and within months, the affordability window slammed shut. A home that cost $2,000 a month suddenly cost $3,200. Same house, same buyer, same everything, except the math was now laughing in their face. And as if that wasn't enough, millions of Americans suddenly became locked into their homes with ultra-low mortgage rates. Imagine being tied to a 3% mortgage. Would you sell? Exactly. Nobody wants to trade a once-in-a-lifetime loan for a 7% one. So people stayed put, moved less, sold less, and the housing supply dried up like a lake in a heat wave. Not because there aren't houses, because nobody wants to give theirs up. This is how the affordability crisis truly tightened its grip. Not in one giant explosion, but in a slow, relentless squeeze. Wages stayed flat, construction stalled, mortgage rates doubled, supply froze, and all of it combined into a single reality for millions of Americans. The market didn't just get tough, it got rigged against them. The door didn't just close, it was slammed, locked, and bolted from the inside.
If you want to understand why America can't build enough homes, you have to stop looking at the market and start looking at the map, the literal map. Because the biggest force shaping housing isn't Wall Street or interest rates or even developers. It's zoning, the quiet, bureaucratic, invisible rulebook that decides what gets built, where, and for whom. And most Americans have no idea how powerful it actually is. In many cities across the country, 70 to 90% of all residential land is reserved exclusively for single-family homes. That means no duplexes, no triplexes, no townhomes, no apartments anywhere near job centers, no affordable options, nothing but one house on one lot for one family at one very high price. People think the market failed, but the market isn't even allowed to try. The law literally forbids building anything cheaper. And that's the part nobody talks about. Zoning wasn't created to make homes affordable. It was created to protect neighborhoods, specifically the people who already lived in them. After World War II, when the suburbs exploded and millions of families moved into newly built communities, homeowners wanted the same thing: stability, safety, rising property values, predictability. So local governments wrote zoning codes that made sure nothing would ever change too much. And for a long time, that worked for the people living there. But here's the catch. Once property values become a political priority, affordability stops being one. City councils listen to voters, and most voters in expensive cities aren't renters trying to get in. They're homeowners trying to keep things the way they are. So when someone proposes building affordable housing or a small apartment building, or even just an accessory unit in someone's backyard, the response is almost always the same. Neighbors complain, meetings get heated, and the whole thing gets shut down. Not because people hate affordable housing in theory, they just don't want it near their house. This is the essence of NIMBY, not in my backyard. It's one of the most powerful political forces in America, and it doesn't even need a national lobbying group. It happens one neighborhood meeting at a time, one complaint at a time, one permit denial at a time. Homeowners show up to protect what they have. Renters, who need the housing, are often not even in the room. And the result is catastrophic. Cities literally block supply even when they desperately need it. San Francisco estimates it needs more than 80,000 new homes, but getting permits takes 3 to 4 years, sometimes longer. Los Angeles once banned apartments in 75% of its residential land. Boston and Seattle restrict building heights so aggressively that massive parts of the city stay frozen in time. You can't fix affordability when the rules make construction nearly impossible. And so the crisis doesn't just continue, it compounds. Supply flatlines, prices keep rising, and the people who suffer most are the people who weren't lucky enough to buy at the right time. Young families, millennials trying to start their lives, workers who move to big cities for jobs but can't live anywhere near them. Housing becomes a privilege, passed from one generation to the next like inheritance. Meanwhile, everyone else is left fighting for whatever scraps the market is allowed to produce. And the brutal irony, the very rules written to protect neighborhoods are the same rules slowly strangling them, turning vibrant cities into exclusive enclaves where only the already successful can stay. This is the invisible force almost no American ever sees, but it shapes everything. If the story so far feels bad, this is the part where it gets worse. Because for decades, housing was mostly between families. Some people bought, some people sold, and the system, while flawed, was at least human. But after the 2008 crash, something shifted. Something big. Wall Street walked into the housing market like it had just discovered a new gold mine. When millions of families were losing their homes after the financial crisis, banks started dumping properties in bulk, desperate to get toxic assets off their books. And who showed up with billions of dollars and zero hesitation? Blackstone, Invitation Homes, American Homes for Rent,
Private equity firms that had never cared about suburban neighborhoods suddenly became the biggest home buyers in entire cities. And these companies didn't buy hundreds of homes, they bought thousands, sometimes tens of thousands. Whole neighborhoods snapped up in a way no normal family could ever compete with. And that's the moment when something fundamental broke. Housing stopped being just a place to live and officially became an asset class, a product line. These firms bought homes, did light renovations, rented them out, and held them long-term, slowly raising rents because, well, they could. And when corporations treat homes like they treat stock portfolios, something predictable happens. Prices rise, not because families want the homes, but because corporations do. And if you're a first-time homebuyer, this is where you start to lose the fight. In many cities today, 30 to 40% of all purchases are made by investors, not families. So the people who just want a home to live in end up bidding against cash buyers, hedge funds, private equity landlords, and investor groups who can buy 10 properties at a time without blinking. It's not a fair fight. You're not competing with your neighbors anymore, you're competing with Wall Street. And while the giant institutional buyers were transforming housing into a corporate asset, another force crept in through the side door: short-term rentals. Airbnb was supposed to help people rent out a spare room. Instead, in city after city, thousands of entire homes were pulled out of the long-term market and converted into mini hotels. A whole shadow housing market emerged, where homes that should have housed families were suddenly earning more money as weekend rentals for travelers. Every home that becomes an Airbnb is a home that disappears from the supply available to actual residents. It's supply shrinkage disguised as entrepreneurship. And the result of all of this is devastating. Rents climb, prices climb even faster. Young people who did everything right still can't buy. Wealth inequality grows because ownership becomes a luxury reserved for people who already had a head start. And the saddest part? We've quietly crossed the line. Housing is no longer treated as a human necessity. It's a financial product, packaged, priced, traded, optimized, and squeezed for every dollar it can produce. The market didn't just change. It evolved into something colder, more strategic, and far less interested in people. And the people who pay the price are the ones who just need a place to live.
Here's the part nobody wants to hear. Even though everyone knows exactly what's wrong with America's housing system, almost nothing is going to change anytime soon. Because the biggest obstacles aren't economic, they're political, cultural, generational, structural, and they're baked so deeply into the system that fixing them feels like trying to turn an oil tanker with a kayak paddle. Let's start with the politics. Every sensible solution, allowing duplexes and triplexes, loosening zoning rules, taxing large investors, cracking down on short-term rentals, gets blocked before it even reaches the starting line. Why? Because homeowners hate these changes. They show up at every city meeting, every zoning hearing, every town vote. Politicians know this, and the one rule every elected official understands is brutally simple. Don't anger the people who vote. And in America, homeowners vote. Renters usually don't. So politicians protect the group that keeps them in office, and that guarantees gridlock. But beneath that gridlock is a deeper contradiction, something I call the affordability paradox. Everyone wants cheaper housing. Everyone. But nobody wants their property value to fall. Americans have been taught for generations that their home is their most important investment. So any policy that might bring down prices, even slightly, feels like a threat to people's life savings. And because millions of families think this way, lowering prices becomes politically impossible. The market stays frozen in place by collective fear. Then there's the demographic squeeze. Millennials are now entering their 30s and 40s, the prime home buying years, and they're hitting the market all at once. This creates enormous demand, but baby boomers are living longer, retiring later, and holding on to their homes for far more years than previous generations ever did. Supply doesn't circulate, homes don't get passed down, the system clogs, and this generational mismatch will keep prices high for decades. And even if every political barrier vanished tomorrow, the construction industry simply can't keep up.
There's a severe labor shortage, material costs remain high, local rules slow everything down to a crawl, and high interest rates have caused builders to slam the brakes on new projects. Even the companies willing to build more homes can't do it fast enough. America doesn't have the workforce, the speed, or the cost structure to catch up to demand, not even close. And this brings us to the hardest truth. The American dream is slipping away. For decades, owning a home wasn't just shelter, it was the main way Americans built wealth. It was the foundation for stability, security, intergenerational progress. But if an entire generation can't buy homes, then an entire generation loses the primary engine that was supposed to build their future. Housing didn't become expensive overnight. It became expensive because the system was built piece by piece to make it that way. It was shaped by zoning rules, political pressure, corporate incentives, and decades of choices that protected homeowners instead of future generations. And until America fixes zoning, regulates investors, and builds far more homes, this crisis isn't going anywhere. It will keep getting worse, slowly, quietly, relentlessly. And the truth is, for millions of Americans, the dream of owning a home is no longer a dream. It's becoming a fantasy.